Hey guys, so this is a video to go through the lesson Hang On Dolly. This is a lesson on reading comprehension, specifically sharing key ideas in a summary. So, what is the most important? What are the key ideas inside of a summary? So, this lesson is in Teacher Made, which you know how to get into. So, first of all, I'm going to read the directions, and the directions say to read the text and complete the activities on page 3. So, let's jump in. um, Elizabeth, Dolly, Shepherd loved adventure. Once she even accepted her brother's dare to jump off a roof while holding an umbrella. It was her first time jumping from a high place, but it wouldn't be her last. So the very first sentence says she loves adventure, and then the next 2 or 3 sentences support that. That she's jumping from high places, tells about the first time she jumped from a high place, and says straight out she will do it again, right? Because it wouldn't be her last time to do it. So, paragraph 2. There were no airplanes when Dolly was growing up. Instead, she was thrilled to see enormous hot air balloons floating overhead. Daredevils thrilled crowds by parachuting from these high flying balloons. So, those of you who've been in New Mexico for a while, think about the hot air balloons you see out on the west side all times of year, but especially in the fall. Can you imagine seeing somebody like parachuting from those? These would probably be higher, I'm guessing, but wow, what a sight to see, right? You guys can actually picture that because you have experience probably with hot air balloons. Paragraph 3. In 1903, when Dolly was 16 years old, she took a job serving food at Alexandra Palace. It was London's largest entertainment complex. A complex is a building or a group of buildings. So it was London's largest entertainment building or group of buildings and hosted carnivals, concerts, and more. Here she met many different performers, daredevils, and acrobats. One person Dolly met was Auguste Gaudron. I don't know if he's French or not. Gaudron was a parachutist and performer. One day, Gaudron gave Dolly a tour of his workshop. She asked so many questions about his hot air balloons and parachutes that he finally asked if she'd like to perform as a parachutist and jump from a hot air balloon. She immediately answered yes, which we could kind of guess she would, right? Because it said in the very first sentence that she's always liked adventure. And that sounds like one to me. On the scheduled date, thousands of people filled the Alexandra Palace. Butterflies fluttered in Dolly's stomach as she made her way through the crowd. So think about that phrase, butterflies fluttered. Were there actually butterflies in her stomach, or is that a way of saying something else? Think about that as an idiom, which means a phrase that means something different than what the words actually mean. Think about what that phrase actually means. So, butterflies fluttered in Dolly's stomach as she made her way through the crowd. A monstrous gas-filled balloon stood before her. Gaudron led Dolly to the basket. Dolly stepped into the sling, a long strip of webbing about 6 inches wide that attached to the parachute. The sling passed between her legs and would carry her weight during her performance. Her right hand held a trapeze bar and hung from the parachute. Holding it over her head would keep her upright as she dropped. Dolly's heart raced as she sat on the edge of the basket with her feet dangling over the side. Would you stop and really try to picture this? Okay. She's sitting on the edge of the balloon and she's basically strapped in, and then she's holding onto a trapeze bar. So yeah, that sounds terrifying to me personally. Okay, so we'll continue with these paragraphs that are specifically about her first jump in something. Hands off, Gaudron shouted. The men holding the basket stepped back, and the hot air balloon lifted into the air. It was Dolly's first balloon ride, and she watched with excitement as the buildings below grew smaller and smaller. Cheers from the crowd faded into silence. So that's how high up she is that she can't hear the crowd anymore. We're over 2,000 feet. Get ready to jump, Gaudron said. Dolly looked down at her landing spot. Go, signaled Gaudron. Dolly took a deep breath and jumped. Her body plunged toward the earth, picking up speed with every second. Moments later, Dolly felt a tug on her arms as her parachute billowed to life. It slowed her down and carried her gently back to earth. Her first aerial, or in the air, so her first in the air adventure had been a success, and she had loved it. Dolly worked hard to learn everything she could about parachuting from hot air balloons. Dolly didn't dwell or think about something for a long time. So Dolly didn't dwell on the danger of her jumps. Still, not all of her landings were perfect. Sometimes, so now paragraph 13 is kind of moving us forward into the future, right? So we read about the one specific first jump, and now we're kind of learning about a pattern of her jumps. So still, not all of her landings were perfect. Sometimes Dolly admitted to coming within a whisker of death. So again, that's another phrase that just means she was pretty close to death. These experiences would have frightened off most people, but not Dolly. She continued riding hot air balloons and parachuting from thousands of feet in the sky for years to come. Okay, so one thing you can do, well, let's go and identify important details. So think about the most important details from Hang On Dolly and look at the details below and check the 3 details that you think are the most important. These details will help us write a summary. So Dolly's brother dared her to jump off a roof and she did. So that is true, right? That's paragraph 1. But do you think it's one of the most important details? Dolly was very curious about jumping out of hot air balloons and agreed to perform as a parachutist. That's also true. And this leads us to what she does for the rest of the story, right? This is a story about Dolly who jumps out of balloons. So what do you think? Is this one of the most important details? When she was 16, Dolly met Auguste Gaudrin, who was a parachutist. So this is the person who introduces her to jumping from balloons and allows her to do it. So do you think this is one of the most important details? The Alexandra Palace was an entertainment complex where Dolly first worked. So that is also true. Is the name of where she worked super important to the rest of her story? What do you think? Dolly's first name is really Elizabeth. That's also true. Is it a super important detail related to how she became a parachutist? The hot air balloon Dolly jumped out of was over 2,000 feet in the air. So that is true. It tells how high the balloon was when she first jumped. Is that an important detail? Okay. So now, hopefully the conclusion you came to was that Dolly was curious about jumping out of hot air balloons. That is super important. That when she was 16, she met Auguste Gaudrin, who was a parachutist. That is a key detail and super important. And then the hot air balloon that she jumped out of was over 2,000 feet in the air. That is super important. Let's come see if we're right. So now you're going to use this information to write a summary. So Hang On Dolly is about, in this space, you're going to write the name, who's about. Is it about Fred? Is it about Sally? Is it about... And how she became what did she become, y'all? Did she become an underwater basket weaver? Did she become a teacher? Did she become a parachutist out of hot air balloons? Okay. And then we're going to list 2 details that kind of give the chronology of what of how she got there. Okay. You could go back through the text, guys, and find that information. But this graphic organizer helps you. You can use information from this graphic organizer to do that. So you might say, so we identified that Dolly was curious about jumping out of balloons and agreed to perform. That was an important detail. And when she was 16, she met Auguste Gaudrin. That was super important. So, and then her first hot air balloon jump was 2,000 feet high. We got to figure out which one of those things came first. And it was when she was 16. So first and then you could basically write this in your own words, met Auguste Gaudrin, who was when she was 16, right? Might add that he was a parachutist if you want. Everybody's sentence doesn't have to be exactly the same, but you need the same content, the same gist, right? Next, so see the I've provided you the transition words that help you order your writing and your thinking. So next, of these three things, what's the next thing that happened? She was curious about the hot air balloons, or her first hot air balloon jump was 2,000 feet. Well, the next thing is that she was curious. So you could say next she saw people jumping out of balloons and was curious and learned about it, something like that. So you're not going to just copy this, but you can get the sentiment and put it in your own words, the gist. And then finally, then she made her first jump. It was, and again, you can say from 2,000 feet in the air. Again, you're kind of putting this last key important detail in your own words. All right, y'all, I hope that really helped you. And now go and do whatever is the next step that you've been assigned for today. Thanks.